Alright, so I am now back and I have changed because it's very hot in my crib. So let's get this going.
In October, a writer who calls himself a national security insider talked about a Russia, Ukraine, and NATO disaster. His worst-case, very possible scenario looked like this. The two sides are locked in an escalatory cycle that, along current trends, will eventually bring them into direct conflict, and then go nuclear, killing millions of people and destroying much of the world. This is obviously a bold prediction and certainly an unwise one to make, in part because, if I'm right, I'm unlikely to be around to take credit for it. The writer of that article was Jeremy Shapiro, the research director for the European Council on Foreign Relations. His specialty is U.S. foreign policy. He also served in the U.S. State Department from 2009 to 2013.
Sorry to pause, but today I'm eating straight up chicken, fried chicken with some seasoning.
People issuing such dire warnings are not just some loons on social media trying to increase their audience numbers. Shapiro said if Russia starts losing too badly, which seems probable, it might use tactical nuclear weapons, after which NATO will strike back. This is a scenario he hopes won't become a reality. If it does, he said, this will happen next. Fearing that those attacks will destroy the Russian strategic nuclear capability and thus leave them defenseless against NATO conventional forces.
Bro, I just canceled 3 ads, bro, in a row.
The Russians will launch a first-strike strategic nuclear attack on the slim hope that it'll weaken the Western resolve or capability to respond and save their regime. I will then have something in the order of a few minutes to send out an email to my colleagues saying, I told you so. If that's not bad, we don't know what is. But there are a few more reasons why 2023 is going to be the astrological Chinese year of the toilet. The war has also caused an energy crisis, which won't just go away next year. In fact, this winter, it's believed that so many people will struggle to heat their homes and that there will be a significant increase in the number of deaths in the worst affected places. The fact that power is so expensive in some nations means those without much money will go without electricity and possibly food. This will lead to widespread ill health, which might manifest as a really bad decrease in life expectancy in the coming year. We'll talk about this decrease in life expectancy soon. In 2022, the Financial Times asked experts how the energy crisis will affect health in Britain alone, and the answer they got back was it will put a health time bomb under Britain's most vulnerable. The BBC wrote, with the world in the grip of a global energy crisis, hundreds of millions of people are now facing fuel poverty this winter as they struggle to keep their homes warm. The consequences could be wide-reaching and long-lasting. Yay to 2023. In case you didn't know, many people living in so-called rip-off Britain struggle to pay their energy bills anyway. But this crisis has made matters a life-or-death situation, and just imagine how the Ukrainians will suffer. Britain is a wealthy nation, and this is a scenario the BBC said was going to happen in winter. Elderly people will wrap themselves in coats, scarves, and gloves to sit in their living rooms. Parents will worry about whether their babies are warm enough as they add an extra blanket to their cots. Gas fires will go unlit. In 2020, around 36 million people in Europe could not keep their houses warm when they needed to.
Wow.
At that same time, 16% of people in the US suffered from what's called energy poverty. Around 25% of Chinese people live under the same conditions. It's thought this situation will get worse this winter. People will die, but others will suffer the ill effects after the winter. The BBC said there's a higher risk of stroke, respiratory infection, and falls or other injuries due to people's reduced strength and dexterity in low temperatures. Cold homes can have both short and long-term consequences for a person's health, well-being, and even their opportunities in life. The current energy crisis will spread out. The UK is already reporting a tsunami of need, and food banks are becoming the norm for many more people. The US and the EU also report that more people have turned to food banks right now. How will this affect social harmony? Will the resentment lead to people voting for the next wicked populist that comes along and spouts words of violence and hate? It's happened before, and it can happen again. You might remember hearing about what happened in Germany in the 1930s when a large part of the population was down on its knees in abject poverty. 2023 might be a bad year of hopelessness for many people, and they might grab at any branch held out. And trust us, the reliably partisan, polarizing media will make things worse, not better. The global pandemic hurt us badly, but now with the war, the situation is much worse. The UK media is saying that even with more food banks, demand is so great right now that sooner or later people will have to be turned away empty-handed. That is a sad, sad thought, especially as many of the world's richest people are seeing their wealth rise astronomically, especially if they have large shares in arms or drugs industries. Talk about rubbing salt into gaping wounds. Something has to change. The world's most vulnerable need some good news for once. Unfortunately, they're not going to find it here today. Let's now focus solely on that cheery subject we call death. If you're worried right now, you're going to be climbing the walls in a few minutes. Don't worry too much, we'll finish on a lighter note. In the UK, excess deaths have gone through the roof, with many thousands more people just dropping down dead. We're not talking about only COVID deaths either. Something is killing people.
You know we skip ads out here. We skip ads.
And we don't know what it is, or at least we aren't unequivocally sure what it is. The Spectator wrote in November, "What's causing these deaths? It isn't COVID. Just 27% of excess deaths in England for the most recent week have COVID as the underlying cause. Instead, problems that built up over lockdowns are being keenly felt now." The British Heart Foundation wrote that 30,000 people in England alone have needlessly died of heart disease since the start of the pandemic. 230 heart-related deaths per week. The media is saying it would not have occurred if lockdowns hadn't happened. We're not arguing against the lockdowns, we're just being the messenger of bad news. Please don't shoot us. In October, Fortune talked about young people in the US who were perfectly healthy, just dropping down dead from some kind of heart problem. The article mentioned the deaths of formerly robust people with no history of health complications, just suddenly giving up the ghost as their hearts failed them. The author believed the cause was people having had COVID in the past, and it later caused significant damage to the heart. We don't have the data related to excess deaths in the US, so it's impossible to ascertain the number right now. But what if things are similar to what they are in Europe and other countries for that matter? The EU and the UK have provided up-to-date death rate numbers, and it's scary what's been happening in 2022. If this continues to 2023, talk about a giant poop sandwich. In August 2022, many countries in Europe, and we mean many, showed a 15 to 30% rise in excess deaths compared to August 2016 to 2019. The EU reported that in July, Spain's excess death rate compared to pre-pandemic levels was up 37%, Cyprus up 33%, and Greece was up 31%. In other months, the death rate in many EU countries continued this trend, and as in the UK, many of these weren't direct COVID deaths. The EU said the heat waves possibly did it back in the summer, but right now it would seem something else can be blamed. The UK government wrote this in October relating to England and Wales. The number of deaths was above the 5-year average in private homes, 31.1% above 790 excess deaths. Hospitals, 14.5% above, or 678 excess deaths. Care homes, 10.1% above, or 225 excess deaths. And other settings 2.5% above, or 20 excess deaths. It said 5.8% of the total deaths in England and Wales involved COVID. There were 11,938 deaths for the week ending the 21st of October 2022. 1,714, it said, were excess deaths. A lot for just 1 week. We also found data that said in the Netherlands and Germany excess deaths were up for October. It's very worrying, which is why many EU and British politicians are asking for a thorough investigation. It's worth noting that the summer of 2022 was indeed Europe's hottest summer on record. But if you look at statistics, the summers and the years before the pandemic were also record-breaking. They also led to excess deaths, but now the excess deaths are in excess of those excess deaths. We need that investigation immediately because the increased death rates are frankly staggering. We don't know for sure what's causing it, and as we said, we don't yet know if it's happening in all countries since there isn't enough data yet. Some experts have said it could be linked to a COVID infection from the past, while others have said it could also be a consequence of lockdowns and associated health complications, or from the lack of medical care during pandemic imprisonment. The Seattle Times wrote in October, U.S. heart attack deaths jumped sharply among young adults in second year of pandemic. The article said this was because of complications after a COVID infection, although that's not 100% certain as of yet. Also, that data is fairly old. It would be worrying if these heart issues are still happening and will continue to happen in 2023. Israel wanted to figure out why so many young folks were getting myocarditis or pericarditis, inflammation of the heart muscles or tissue, and scientists have been working hard. In a recent paper published in the National Library of Medicine titled The Incidence of Myocarditis and Pericarditis in Post-COVID-19 Unvaccinated Patients, a large population-based study, the researchers concluded we did not observe an increased incident of neither pericarditis nor myocarditis in adult patients recovering from COVID-19 infection. The study consisted of hundreds of thousands of people, and the number of people that developed pericarditis or myocarditis with or without getting COVID was about the same. It should be said men got it more than women, But what if these heart problems, as the study suggests, aren't related to having had COVID? Many other studies will be different, and some have discovered cardiovascular problems related to COVID-19. If all of these deaths are related or not related to past infections, it doesn't really matter to you as you head into 2023. What matters is that the death rates are disturbing and could potentially stay that way or even get worse. It's hard to understand since the data is incomplete, but it seems that death rates have been rising even though many of the most vulnerable people died already during the pandemic. Wouldn't that mean death rates should be going down? We found data on Japan and Australia that pointed to this worrying trend. Although European nations seem to be the worst hit, the UK's Telegraph wrote in October, experts believe higher deaths from heart complaints and diabetes mean the indirect effects of the pandemic will be greater than COVID itself. That's just one opinion, by the way, so wait for others. A week later, the Telegraph ran the headline, "Crisis as excess deaths soar to levels higher than during COVID pandemic." The Guardian called the massive rise in deaths a puzzle. The British Medical Journal, or according to Facebook fact checkers, a blog, also has articles that discuss these excess deaths. As we said, the data isn't in for all countries, but if it turns out that some experts are right, and lockdowns led to more ill health, does this mean 2023 will be a year of excess deaths too? The short answer is you might have a higher chance of dying next year than a few years ago when the virus was nothing but a twinkle in the eye of an atom. It seems that masses of people not seeking medical attention during the lockdowns or people overeat.
Okay, so in my personal opinion, it's like, when the planes spray things like cadmium and all the literal toxins into the air and people start dying. Pretty self-explanatory. And then the whole COVID thing, during COVID, people were not moving around and exercising as much. Like personally, I used to be muscular. And ever since COVID, the day COVID started and I got laid off, I just started I didn't work out anymore. And now my arms is flabby. Like, it's not like, it's not ridiculous, but like, it's flabby. Like, this isn't me. But that's me flexing. That's not even a lot. So just imagine people on like a higher scale of that all day, every day. So yeah, it's a lot of different things. And like the whole plane thing, like they literally spray chemicals that are toxic to the human body in air all over the US. Depopulation, all that.
Eating and over drinking or sitting on their backsides for too long might have caused some everlasting damage to themselves. The National Bureau of Economic Research recently asked if this was collateral damage of policy choices. So, with the possibility of becoming an excess death statistic in 2023, coupled with the very real possibility of nuclear war doing a lot more than compelling you to rinse your skin with soap and water, this year has all the markings of a nightmare in the making. It's no surprise you're hearing less about other world issues at the moment, such as global warming and environmental destruction. As we said at the start, people's hierarchy of external fears sometimes has to be updated. We imagine yours has changed a lot over the last few years. Still, if this show has made you feel somewhat down about life, don't worry. We're going to give you some good news in a follow-up show. We guess the best show for you to watch now is What Happens When You're Dying. Or brighten up your day with What Happens to Your Body After You Die.
That's crazy. The bottom of the disturbing Reddit post iceberg. Oh my gosh, Reddit can be a dark, dark place.